Insightful podcasts by informative hosts. Insights into Things, a podcast network. Welcome to Insights into Teens, a podcast series exploring the issues and challenges of today's youth. Your hosts are Joseph and Madison Whalen, a father and daughter team making their way through the challenges of the teenage years.
Welcome to Insights into Teens. This is episode 172. What does it, I totally blew it. What does it mean to be woke? Clearly I'm not woke. I can't even read the script.
We'll just cut it out in post.
We'll fix it in post. I'm your host, Joseph Whalen, and my responsible and aware co-host, Madison Whalen.
Hi, everyone.
See, at least I got your name right. That's something, right?
Yeah, sometimes that's all you really need. Or,
Sometimes that's the most you can hope for.
yeah.
So how you doing this week?
All right. Been chilling ever since I've been off of school.
Yes, you have. Enjoying your time off.
Yep,
That's
definitely.
what the summer's for. Relax, recharge, and get ready to go back.
Yep.
So this is the next, what we like to call controversial topic in this series of 9 hard-hitting topics. I guess as hard-hitting as we get here on Insights into Teens.
Yeah.
So woke, it's one of the most divisive and misused terms in society today. A term that's being used to define political philosophies, stifle the education of certain topics, and explain away business philosophies and put down people you would disagree with. On today's episode of Insights into Teens, we're going to talk about what woke is, what it really means, and why it's so misused as a word. But before we get into that, I do want to just offer a real quick public service announcement and suggest that you, if you don't already do so, subscribe to the podcast. You can find audio versions of this podcast listed as Insights into Teens, and audio and video versions of all the network's podcasts can be found listed as Insights into Things anywhere you can get a podcast these days. I would also encourage you to write in, give us your feedback. This series of episodes is a great example to call in and tell us how wrong we are or how right we are and exchange some ideas with us. We would definitely welcome that.
Yep.
You can email us at comments@insightsintothings.com. You can hit us on Twitter at insights_things. Or you can find links to all of our social media on our official website at www.insightsintothings.com. Are we ready?
Sure.
Here we go. So you did most of the research on this one here. And the first source that we used was theatlantic.com. And it's an excerpt from a letter to the Atlantic from a concerned parent. And they say, I write as a concerned parent of a 5th grader at a private school that appears to prioritize, quote, social justice over academic excellence. The school has brought in a consultant, and now the kids are reading all this new woke literature, and at the expense of the classics we all grew up on, like To Kill a Mockingbird and The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Most of the teachers and parents I talk with just want school to be school, not some kind of Maoist social re-education. Who's this all for? Another one says, I'm a left-wing New York Democrat. I believe strongly in equal rights for all people, and I think we've still got a ways to go when it comes to equality. But I don't want school to make my son feel bad just because he's white. It's not like he owned slaves. His great-great-great-grandparents were starving in Ireland during the time of slavery. I think these two letters from really two very different camps kind of illustrate what the problem in society is today. It's that you have to be one extreme or the other. There's no moderation. You either jump in with both feet and you charge headlong into these things without really thinking them through, because these really aren't the most intelligent statements that adults could be making about these topics.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of sort of where we're going with the podcast today, to highlight where some of these problems really are. What's our next source tell us?
So pardon my pronunciation of this. Our next source comes from can you help me with that?
MercadoNet?
Mercadonet.com. And basically, this is an excerpt of an individual's blog that's titled, quote, "Wokeness is stalking your kids, and here's how to protect them." In recent weeks, the following incidents took place, all involving people I know and know personally who live near me. A middle school teacher was unable to focus at school where a female student who identifies as a boy, identifying as a dog, kept barking in class. The teacher refused to say anything about it. A girl refused to use the school washroom all day because she didn't want to use the gender-neutral washroom with boys. Using the girls' only washroom, which is out of the way, would single her out among her peers. A mother was baffled when her teen started spouting words like colonialism and patriarchy while dressing down her father for not clearing his plate from the table. A grad year student looking into post-secondary options found the first required course for the local college's fine arts program is, quote, "Intro to Critical and Cultural Theory," a
Marxist?
a Marxist-based philosophy that subtly encourages aggression and division. An elementary student borrowed a library graphic novel of Little Women in which Jo comes out as a lesbian and shares a kiss with another girl. A Catholic high school teacher asked students to introduce themselves using their preferred pronouns.
Now, let me take a second to kind of comment on a couple of these things here. Some of these are kind of the extreme of, I don't even want to say it's woke, it's really just idiocy, right? So if you've got someone who's identifying as a dog, okay, that's just a cry for attention there.
Yeah, and I actually have an instance kind of with this. My math teacher ended up mentioning something about this with some of the other students in my class, and I ended up overhearing it. And she was talking about, like, I have no problem with kids who want to identify as different genders, but I cross the line when you want to identify as an animal.
Yeah, I mean, that's really someone that's if you stop to think about it and you talk about it with them and you see what they're doing, chances are they're probably mocking the entire situation there.
Yeah.
And if they're not, that really is a cry for help, and they probably need some assistance.
Yeah.
Because if they're identifying as a different, animal race, they're probably traumatized and they're probably hiding from something.
Yeah.
It's not some kind of political thing. And the problem I think we run into is all of this becomes political because everything today becomes political.
Yeah.
And there's legitimate motivation behind a lot of these things that has nothing to do with politics.
Yeah.
And that's sort of lost in a lot of what we're talking about here today. So a couple of examples of wokeism are also taking place in the workforce. A new employee taking diversity and inclusivity training was required to answer yes to the question, does refusing to use a person's preferred pronouns constitute harassment? A hairdresser had 2 customers an hour apart tell her how they, quote, can't say anything in the face of woke ideology such as these scenarios. They feel as if their opinions are being nullified. And again, this is one of those things where it really is, it's not one side or the other. People who take anything to an extreme are really distorting the entire matter for their own purposes.
Yeah.
We just did our episode on Pride Month last week, and we had talked about some of the complaints that people had from the right side, where they don't think that kids should be going to drag shows that are sexually charged. And I don't think that's unreasonable. But in the same breath, they don't want kids going to drag queen story time, which the one that I attended had nothing to do with anything that would have been inappropriate to kids. So the generalization that people tend to have when they come up with these specific examples, where they want to pick out that 1% of the things that do happen and ignore the other 99%, is just another form of extremism where you're distorting the facts to suit your own agenda.
Yeah.
And, a lot of times these anti-woke people say, well, I don't want you indoctrinating my kids. Well, what do you think you're doing when you're distorting the facts of things, and when you're trying to hide historical facts, and when you're trying to ban books that you don't agree with? That's just another form of indoctrination. You don't want people to indoctrinate your kids as long as it's indoctrinating your own philosophy in them, was really what they should be saying.
Yeah.
And that's just hypocrisy.
Yeah, and I'm not gonna ignore the fact that like there's really extreme parts on both sides, like you mentioned. Yes, they're identifying as a dog is just weird and is something that no one should really be accepting, because you can't, that's not something that can really happen. And at the same token, that can also normally not really be seen as a political statement, and normally shouldn't be seen as a political statement. And yeah, some of the fears can be somewhat founded, but again, it's normally a very small minority that just seems to sound louder because it's seen as being really bad or whatever.
Yeah, and the problem that you have is when you take things out of context. Like if you take a quote out of context and you twist it to try to make your own point, you can look like you're making your own point and try to support your own point of view, but because you're taking it out of context, it's really just a lie. And is that how we want to indoctrinate our kids, to teach them to lie in order to get what they want?
Yeah.
You either have morals or you don't, and you can't pick and choose. You either play by the rules or you don't. And the people that want to distort the rules and change the rules to win the game are no better than the people that they're coming out against. And I think really cooler minds need to prevail here, and you have to have reasonable people get together and discuss these things.
Yeah.
So we're going to take a break. We're going to come back. We're going to talk about empowering our youth, and we'll talk about what the word woke actually means, what the dictionary definition is, and how far off and distorted it's being made in the popular mainstream media. We'll be right back.